Welcome to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. Join us every Sabbath on Zion Road Radio for a look at the life, deeds, and words of Yeshua Messiah and his followers from the Torah-centric Hebraic perspective they were originally lived and written in.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you find rest for your souls. You find rest for your souls. Oh, you find rest for your souls when you walk in his way.
Today's program is on John chapter 11, verse 45 through John chapter 12, verse 19. Please get out your Bible and follow along. What does the people's response to the resurrection of Lazarus show us about the two different kinds of people? Did the whole nation of Israel reject Yeshua as the Messiah? Why were the corrupt religious leaders plotting to kill him? What did Yeshua's death have to do with the redemption of the nation of Israel? And how is the answer to that question related to the regathering of the remnant of Israel in our generation? Stay tuned throughout today's program for the answers to these questions and more in John chapter 11, verse 45 through John chapter 12, verse 19. And now, here's Eliyahu ben David's insight on the plot to kill the king.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you find rest for your souls. You find rest for your souls. Oh, you find rest for your souls when you walk in his way.
Shabbat Shalom, friends. We're moving through the book of John, and as we go through the book of John, we find that it has a perspective of its own. It brings in many things that we haven't found in the other Gospels, and it's very intense. And I think that's especially true as we get closer towards the end of the book. We're going to focus on the plot to kill the king. And surely that is a very intense thing. And there's some other things too in these verses. So we want to get right into that. It says, therefore, many of the Judeans who came to Mary and saw what Yeshua did, that is, raising Lazarus, believed in him. Now, this directly follows up the lesson we did last week. That is the entire story of Lazarus being raised from the dead, and a crowd of people observing as Yeshua called Lazarus out of the grave after being dead for 4 days. And these people were there mourning his death because they all knew he had been dead for 4 days. And truly, you can just imagine being there yourself. And I've never gone to a funeral where I've seen anything like that happen. That was pretty amazing, wasn't it? So it's not a surprise that after seeing that, many of those people put faith in Yeshua. Really, wouldn't you be foolish not to after seeing that? And yet, some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things which Yeshua had done. And so here we have two kinds of people. And I just want to note this. I think it's interesting. The section of Scripture here starts with this. And we still find this now all the time. We have the first kind of person that lives in reality. They observe what reality is. This amazing thing happened where Yeshua raised Lazarus from the dead. They saw this and they believed what was obviously true, that Yeshua is the Messiah, and they put their faith in him. They were people who respond to the truth. And that's really the only kind of sane person. That's actually the truth. And that's the kind of person that Yeshua is looking for. People like that. And then we have these other people who see this thing that happened, which is so amazing. And this is their opportunity to join themselves to the Messiah of Israel. But instead, they go off to the existing power structure and basically seek the favor from the world's elite. And why do those people do that? Well, it's because they love the world and the things of the world, and really the spiritual things don't hold a great deal of interest for them. And it's such a sad thing when we see this. Yeshua said in Luke chapter 12, "Do you think that I've come to give peace in the earth? I tell you no, but rather division. For from now on, there will be 5 in one house divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. It's not that Yeshua wants to divide people, but this is the effect that he has everywhere he goes. You see, there's some of the people that see the truth, they love the truth, they respond to the truth. Then there are the other people who are really self-serving. They love the world. They respond to what the world has. And these two positions are totally opposed to each other. It causes division. Who is causing the division? Is it the person who responds to the truth, or the people that hang on to the lies? You see what I'm saying? It's not that Yeshua wants to cause division, but it's that some people want to hang on to the world and hang on to the lies. And so that ultimately does cause division. And so as long as we're in this world, until Messiah comes, this will be the condition. There will be these two kinds of people. And I think this is something that we see from these verses. Well, the chief priests saw this. It says, the chief priests, therefore, and the Pharisees gathered a council, that is the Sanhedrin, and said, what are we doing? For this man does many signs. If we leave him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. Oh, that would be terrible, wouldn't it? It would be for them. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Now, I just believe if this Sanhedrin had really had the best interests of their nation at heart, they saw these many signs, which they admitted, right? They saw all these signs. Shouldn't they be saying, oh, finally our Messiah has come? Let's run right out and accept him. That's what they should have said, right? But instead, it's a big threat to them because they think like the world. They don't think like God. Now, this is amazing because these people are supposed to be the greatest Torah scholars in the entire country, right? These are the most religious, most pious people by every outward sign that meant anything to those people in that religion. And yet, look what was in their heart. They were seeing the signs of the Messiah, and to them, it was a horrible thing. And by saying, what are we doing? You know what they're saying? We're letting this happen. We've got to do something to stop this. and saying everyone will believe in him. Now think about this. If they're that worried, what was really happening in the first century? You know, what we hear in the church is that the Jews rejected Jesus, right? They rejected him. They didn't accept him. And that's why he had to go to the Gentiles to set up the Gentile church. Only that isn't what happened. Look at the huge amount of support that Yeshua was getting from Jewish people there in Jerusalem. That's, in fact, what the Sanhedrin was so afraid of, because he was getting all of this support. People were believing in him. So we see as we go through this, you're going to see this build and build, this support for him among the people. And this just totally flies in the face of this narrative of the Gentile church. It does not stand up to these facts that we have here in the book of John. And as for these rulers, don't be shocked by them. We have plenty of rulers just like them. Should we think that today people are any better than this? Do you think the rulers that we have, say in Washington, D.C., are any better than this? Do you think they wouldn't kill their rivals that they're afraid of? I think there's an awful lot of suicides that go on that I read about in the news that I find very dubious. How about you? This is not something in the ancient past. This is something that has been going on with people in power throughout history. It's just that with Yeshua, we have this kind of a magnifying glass on this thing, and we can look at it and see what happened. But when you're looking at this, you're looking really at most of these various governments, whether it's political governments or religious governments in the world. Now, I'm not saying every one of those people is corrupt, but this is not an uncommon thing that we see going on here. And they said, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Notice that a place and a nation are two different things. A place is a space marked off. So in that case, it's the country of Judea. It could also be a station held by a person in the country, so it could be a position of authority that they're talking about. A nation, on the other hand, is not the same as a country. Now, I've spoken about this in my On the Road to Zion series, but perhaps many of you haven't heard that, and it's hugely important. A nation, the word nation in the Greek is the word ethnos. It means a race. And a race in this context is a people group descended from a common ancestor. In this case, we're talking about Israel, so we mean descended from Jacob, Israel. Descended from him. That's a nation, a people group. And the word nation, by the way, comes from a Latin word that relates to birth. Birth, origin, breed, stock, kind, species, race of people, a tribe. And so really, this is what a nation is. Why do you owe anything to your nation? You owe something to your nation because your life comes from your nation, literally. Because your nation includes people who have this common ancestry. And it's our ancestors that passed on life to us, right? So this is why we owe something to our nation. What about your country? What do you owe to your country? The country you live in. Do you think just being born on a certain piece of ground means now that you owe your allegiance to that particular place? On what basis? Did that piece of ground give you life? So you can see why the powers that be have wanted to confuse this word to make you believe that a nation is the same as a country. It really isn't. Now, I'm not saying that we should betray our country. That would be wrong too. But I'm just saying that just as your family holds a place above the country you live in, your nation that you belong to should also hold a place above the country you live in because you owe your life to your nation. It is, in fact, your family, your larger family. And so when we're talking about Israel as our nation, this is our priority in terms of the people group to whom we owe our allegiance. That's the reason, of course, why the Sanhedrin were worried about the Romans taking away their nation. That's still how the word was understood back then. Today, though, we can read this and not really even understand what it's talking about because the definition of this word has been changed. Now, what you're seeing here is the definition based on the original etymology of the word. In other words, where the word came from. You look this word up in a modern dictionary, and it'll tell you that a nation is the same as a country. I wonder why they would lie in the dictionary. Are there any other words that have been changed? You know, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. One that immediately comes to mind is the word marriage. If life went on another generation or two and Yeshua did not return, would people ever know that marriage in the Bible is the union between a man and a woman in covenant with one another? Would they ever know that? You see, this is how words change over time and how the truth is obscured and the reason why we need the Bible, because the scriptures preserve the truth so we can know what things really mean. But even there, sometimes you have to dig like we did here to see what those original words were actually saying. A certain one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year. By the way, let me say about Caiaphas, the high priest, his tomb was actually found and located in Jerusalem. The tomb of Caiaphas, the high priest, this Caiaphas. And it's written right on his bone box who he is. And not only that, they found 2 nails in his tomb. Were they souvenirs from his victory in this plot? Interesting question, isn't it? Anyway, this is what he said. You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is advantageous for us that one man should die for the people and that the whole nation not perish. Now, this is very interesting in view of the explanation given to us here by John, the writer. He says, now he didn't say this of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied. So here we have this guy doing this wicked stuff, right? Plotting a murder. And plotting a murder of anybody is wrong, but plotting the murder of the Messiah of Israel, that's a traitorous act against his own nation, isn't it? And yet, he prophesied, spoke a word that came from God. That is by the Holy Spirit. Can that happen? Can evil people actually prophesy? You know, some people say that can't happen, but here it happened. If Yahweh can make a donkey talk, he can certainly prophesy through this man. But it tells us the reason this could happen here is because he was the high priest that year. There is an office here that has to be respected even though the man is corrupt. This is part of holy order in the scriptures. It's part of the Torah that those who are in office need to be respected. We need to do that in our nation. We need to do that in our country as well. We must respect those who are in office because the scripture says that all authority is from Yahweh. They wouldn't be in that office unless he allowed that to happen. So an office must be respected, and Yahweh himself respected the office here insofar as he even prophesied through this man. But what was the prophecy about? Well, here's how John explains it. This is what the prophecy meant, according to John here. Yeshua would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but that he might also gather together into one the children of Elohim who are scattered abroad. Interesting. So, John is saying the high priest is not only prophesying about that nation there in Judea, but also about the children of Elohim who are scattered abroad. Interesting. Well, Yeshua had said something similar. In John 10, he said, I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice. They will become one flock, one shepherd. Very similar, right? Two groups that Messiah was specifically coming for. And this prophecy acknowledges that there's two groups. Now, who are these two groups? The one we know, the nation essentially of Judah, there in Judea, we know that one. But what about these children of Elohim who are scattered abroad? Well, if you look up the verse here in most Christian reference works, they're going to tell you, this is referring to the Gentiles who are scattered throughout the world. This is the church. This is a prophecy about the church. But is it? Well, not if you know your scriptures. It's not. So here we have two groups. In the first instance, it was called the people who were in the place. And then we have here those scattered abroad. Messiah mentions other sheep, and he's going to bring them into one flock too. So, who is this other group? Well, the Torah makes this very clear for us. And what you find in the Torah is Yahweh making a covenant with his nation Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, who was named Israel. And they entered into this covenant. And in Deuteronomy, it's presenting for us here Moses talking to the nation. And he's laying out before them their obligations under the covenant. And he's saying, if you don't do this, all these bad things are going to happen to you. And it boils down to the fact that Israel would eventually be expelled from off of their land because of their disobedience to the commandments of Yahweh. And, in fact, we know that it happened. That is what happened. And it happened much later, though. But this is in the Torah. I think it's very interesting that Yahweh gave them this warning before ever they even entered the promised land. He told them, essentially, if you go in there and you obey me in the land, all these good things are going to happen. But if you turn against me and you worship other gods and you do all the evil of the people in the land, I'm going to spit you out of that land. You're not going to be able to stay there anymore. You're going to be expelled out of the land because of your disobedience. And it spells it all out there in the book of Deuteronomy. There's too much there about it for me to read that part to you. But the part I am going to read to you is what Yahweh said would happen to those who are scattered throughout the world, to their descendants many generations later. He says, it shall happen when all these things have come on you, the blessing and the curse, which I've set before you, and you shall call them to mind among all the nations, where Yahweh your Elohim has driven you, and shall return to Yahweh your Elohim, and shall obey his voice. Then Yahweh your Elohim will turn your captivity and have compassion on you, and will return and gather you from all the peoples where Yahweh your Elohim has scattered you. So who are these people, the children of God, who are scattered through the nations that the high priest mentioned? These are the descendants of those scattered Israelites. It's telling us that right in the Torah. Just continuing on here, this is what Yahweh says. If your outcasts are in the outermost parts of the heavens, from there will Yahweh your Elohim gather you. And from there he will bring you back. And Yahweh your Elohim will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. Could that happen even now? Even after all of these thousands of years? Isn't this all ancient history? Well, it might be to some people, but to those of us who are part of this remnant, this is very real. And we know what is written here must happen. The scriptures cannot be broken, and that is a fact. So we are looking for this. We are looking for him to gather us all together and to bring us back to our land. And how can this happen? It says, Yahweh your Elohim will circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed. That's us, their seed. To love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. How does that happen? Here we had this people who were so wicked and rebellious, and then they turned back to Yahweh because their heart has been changed. How can that happen? Jeremiah the prophet wrote about this. And when Jeremiah wrote, the nation of Israel had already been divided into two nations. There was the nation of Judah, which roughly corresponds to the later nation of, or country of Judea, where we're looking at the events right now in the book of John. But the larger part of the people, the 10-tribe kingdom, had pulled away from Judah. And they were a separate nation. And you know, in the entire time that that nation existed, they never had even one righteous king. Not even one. And they just sank deeper and deeper and deeper into idolatry and every imaginable sin, worse than the world, until Yahweh did what he said in the Torah, and he sent the Assyrians to clear them off the land, and from there they were scattered throughout the world. Later, the same thing happened to Judah, but Yahweh did not scatter the entire nation. There was a remnant that came back, and these were the ones that established the group that was there when Yeshua came into the world. This is what Yahweh said after that first group had been scattered, but the second group had not yet been scattered. He says, I will turn again the captivity of my people, Israel and Judah. Notice he's talking about the two groups. I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. Spiritualize that for me, will you? Is that possible, to spiritualize that? And say, oh, well, that means the church, that we would all be in unity in the church. Give me a break. It specifically says, my people, Israel and Judah, I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers. You cannot mistake what that's saying. Has that happened yet? It's partially happened. Because there's many of Judah that are in that land today. You know what that tells us? The process is underway. That's what it tells us. Therefore, don't you be afraid, O Jacob, my servant, says Yahweh, neither be dismayed, Israel. For behold, I will save you from afar, and your seed from the land of your captivity. That's us, their seed. And Jacob shall return, and shall be quiet and at ease, and none shall make him afraid. For I am with you, says Yahweh, to save you. For I will make a full end of the nations where I have scattered you. But I will not make a full end of you. So when that high priest said that Yeshua would die for the children of God who were scattered, of course this is what it's talking about. This is what is relevant to those people. We have some more. This is also from Jeremiah. Yes, I've loved you with an everlasting love. What is an everlasting love? Can you forever reject someone for whom you have everlasting love? That would be a contradiction, right? Therefore, with loving kindness have I drawn you. Yahweh, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Yahweh says, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the uttermost parts of the earth. A great company shall they return here. Where? Of course, to the land where Jeremiah is speaking from. He who scattered Israel will gather him and keep him, as a shepherd does his flock. Oh, I have other sheep who are not of this fold that I must also bring. For Yahweh has ransomed Jacob and redeemed him. It is the death of Yeshua Messiah that makes possible the return of the remnant and the raising up of the remnant nation, because our sins are too great without that. Did Yeshua know when he died on that tree that he was dying to restore his nation? Do you have any doubt? With such a price, is it possible that this could not happen? It must happen. Ezekiel spoke about this. Really, all the prophets did. You know, I looked up the word scattered, and I got a huge list. And most of the time that you find scattered in the Hebrew scriptures, this is what it's referring to. Now, sometimes it's used in the common, ordinary way, like scattering seed or something like that. But it's amazing when you're talking about people being scattered, these are the people it's talking about. Here in Ezekiel chapter 37, it's talking about this valley of the dry bones, right? And these people symbolically being raised up from the dead and made into one living body. And after telling us about this, Yahweh says, Son of man. And he's speaking to Ezekiel, but it sounds to me like he's also speaking to the Messiah. Take one stick and write on it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions. And take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. It is the blood of Yeshua Messiah that joins together the remnant nation into one stick in his hand, an instrument that he can use for the glory of his Father. He says, I'll take the children of Israel from among the nations where they are gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel. And one king shall be king to them all in the latter years. See, this was not to happen at the first coming of Yeshua Messiah. That was not the end of Yahweh's plan. It was vital to it, more vital than anything. But this would finally be played out in the latter years. We're looking for this today, and it is indeed underway. It is happening. It's very interesting that among the early believers, the scattered remnant of the 12 tribes formed the core of that assembly of believers. So much emphasis is put on the Gentiles by the church that this simple truth often gets overlooked. For instance, in James, the brother of Yeshua, who was the leader of that assembly, he wrote a letter, and he starts out saying, the letter from Jacob, we say James in English, Jacob, a servant of Elohim and of Adonai Yeshua the Messiah, to the 12 tribes which are in the diaspora. So he specifically mentions the 12 tribes. And this word diaspora is also used by Peter. In his first letter, he says he's writing to the chosen ones who are living as foreigners in the diaspora. So they're both writing to these 12 tribes scattered about, and that's really what diaspora means. And in some Bible versions, it actually says scattered about. This is from Strong's. It has the word diaspora, Israelites resident in Gentile countries, which are scattered abroad. So they are. That's who they are. So this doctrine that God rejected Israel and then replaced it with a Gentile church is shown to be entirely incorrect. So it is true, and we're seeing this plot unfold. We're realizing that the national government of Judea, I should really say the government of the country of Judea, they didn't accept Messiah. And that's a fact. But what we're seeing in these verses in John is that multitudes, in fact, of individual Judeans, as well as scattered Israelites in the 12 tribes scattered about, they did accept Messiah. And collectively, they made up the believing remnant of Israel of the first century. They were the assembly of believers, in fact. And later on, and we'll get to this when we go into the book of Acts, at a certain point in time, Yahweh opened up admission into the assembly to the Gentiles. When you get there, what you find is everybody is shocked that this happened. Why are they shocked? It's because they're all Israelites by blood. And now Yahweh's opening this up for Gentiles to come in to be what? Grafted in Israelites. It never changed. This is believing Israel that we're talking about, that we're looking at in the first century. That's why it is not surprising whatsoever that John is explaining this to us here in the book of John. So the thing is that's kind of different about this is that those scattered Israelites remain scattered. They didn't come back. They didn't gather into the land. And why? Wasn't Yahweh's plan for them to come back then? They had to wait to the end of the age for the time for that to happen. But even though this is 2,000 years later, after Messiah gave his life so this could happen, he has redeemed his people. And that's the basis on which we are his people. That's the basis on which we can be his nation and return to our land. Well, it goes on here, it says, from that day forward, they took counsel that they might put him to death. So they're seeing all of these people putting faith in Yeshua, and that's why they're saying, okay, we've got to come up with a plan to kill this man. And they had mentioned the signs. They had said, what are we doing? For this man does many signs. And now They had had this amazing sign with Lazarus, and I'm sure they're thinking, if he's done this, what is it going to be next? And can you imagine how evil their hearts must have been? To actually recognize his signs and plot to kill him? It's amazing. So this is the point at which they began in earnest to put their plot together. It says, Yeshua therefore walked no more openly among the Judeans, but departed from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim. He stayed there with his disciples. So Yeshua knew it wasn't time yet, so he didn't want to be available yet for their plot, and he withdrew to a place called Ephraim. Now, the word Ephraim is known to us because we saw it in the prophecies we were looking at, and Ephraim was used to represent the entire northern kingdom that had eventually been taken into captivity. This was not that same Ephraim, but of course named after Ephraim. This was a town very close to the border, though, between those two kingdoms, where those two kingdoms had been before the captivity ever happened. And there is a city there called Taba, which is a Palestinian city today. So that's where it's located. And I just think this is so interesting because where we see John talking about the scattered remnant, right, and the two peoples, and then we have Yeshua withdrawing to a city which is right essentially on the border where those two nations came together. To me, that's kind of symbolic of what Yeshua had come to do, to gather together the entire nation and make it one nation again. And so I thought that was very interesting. So he stayed there for a period of time, and then it goes on, and it says, now the Passover in Judea was at hand. Many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Then they sought for Yeshua and spoke one with another as they stood in the temple. What do you think, that he isn't coming to the feast at all? And then it goes on, now the chief priests and the Pharisees had commanded that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. Well, John Gill in his commentary says, this made it a doubtful point with some whether he would come to the feast or not. And it goes on to say that the people then were asking this question and coming to see Yeshua because the Pharisees had said this and they could get a reward. The people could get a reward. However, as we progress in the story, it doesn't give that for a reason why the people came. It gives a different reason. So I think that Gill is mistaken about that. I think the reason why they would wonder, what do you think, that he isn't coming to the feast at all, is because he had dropped off the face of the earth, right? He had been there talking to all of them. He had done the miracle and so forth, and then he was just gone. So they were wondering whether he was going to come back or not. And then it says that the chief priests and the Pharisees had commanded that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. Now, they didn't tell the people about their entire plot, that they were going to kill him. So they didn't know that yet. But what happened next? 6 days before the Passover, Yeshua came to Bethany. That'd be day one, probably, right? where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. So they made him a supper there. Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. I think about this and it blows my mind. Just think about this. Here's this guy who just, a short time before this had been dead. And there was this big family crisis, right? And now Yeshua comes and they're all having supper together. And it's just this normal thing, right? And Martha serving supper, Lazarus is there, no doubt talking with Yeshua, probably some other people there, intimate friends. All just normal. This is the thing that kind of blows my mind about Yeshua. Because, on a certain level, he's just a normal guy like you. And this is how he was with his disciples, He's sitting down to supper with these folks. And here's this guy sitting with him who had been dead for 4 days. How could you not believe, right? But then he's just a part of this supper. Well, how do you think that family thought about him? How would you feel? Just think if it was your family. Someone who is a vital part of your family, someone you love, dies. And then 4 days later, this other friend of yours raises him from the dead. How are you going to feel about that person? Let alone the whole Messiah thing. No doubt he was greatly loved by this family. It's in this context that Mary, it says, therefore took a pound of ointment of pure nard, very precious, and anointed the feet of Yeshua and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the ointment. Given what had happened in that family, this is not hard to picture. I wanted to find out a little bit more about nard, which is spikenard. And I found some online. Costs about $10 an ounce today. That's quite a bit, but not so terrible. However, I believe that there's not a lot of spikenard in it. I think it's mostly olive oil. And it has some spikenard in it. But it's still quite a bit of money if you think about it. A Roman pound was 12 ounces. So that would be $120 just for that little bit that we're looking at there. However, the story goes on, and we get to see how much this is really worth. Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, one of his disciples who would betray him, said, "Why wasn't this ointment sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" 300 denarius is a day's wage. 300 denarii is 300 days' wages. So if you give that there's no day's work on each Sabbath, right? We're talking about a year's wages in this ointment. This is a lot of money. A year's wages. And this was happening in Bethany, and the very name of the place means house of the poor. And it was named that because there are a lot of poor people there. So Judas was very concerned for the poor people. And So he scolds her for wasting all of this, saying, why wasn't this ointment sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? So concerned for the poor people. You know, people like this, they're always so concerned for everybody. At least that's what they want you to think. What about the elite and the politicians that are robbing everybody blind? Why are they doing it? Well, I saw an interview recently of one of the world's elite. And when I got done, I was thinking, this man is more giving than St. Francis of Assisi. I mean, what a story. What a story this man has to tell. And yet, he probably has enough money to totally eliminate all of the starvation in Africa. And he doesn't do it. People like this so often are like that. You know, they talk a good game, they sound like they're so caring, but they have ulterior motives in the things they say. This was definitely true of Judas, because we're told here, he said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief. And having the money box used to steal what was put into it. So this was not his first rodeo. This was his regular thing, which means that Yeshua knew he was doing it. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? But Yeshua said, leave her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me. So he could have outed Judas for the thief and liar that he was, but instead he addressed the question. And isn't that so true? You always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me. They did. I mean, that's the name of the town. They always had the poor people there. But there's only one Yeshua Messiah. And you know what? It makes me feel good to know that in that time of his greatest trial, his greatest test, he had people that truly loved him, that nothing was too much for them to give. So I'm really glad for those people, and I'm so glad for Mary and what she did. You know, it's the same thing for us who are part of the remnant, who love Yahweh's nation, who put our whole selves into building his nation. We're doing it for him. We're doing it for Yeshua. But what about the people around us? What do they think of that? You're wasting your resources. You're wasting your life. How can you do that? You're crazy. That could go to much better use. That's what they think. We can't help what they think. Doesn't matter what they think. It was Mary who was right here. You cannot give too much to Yeshua Messiah, and you can never outgive him because he's already given you everything. A large crowd, therefore, of the Judeans learned that he was there, and they came, not for Yeshua's sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. So here we're seeing that this large crowd of people, they weren't coming to get some reward from the Pharisees. They were coming for Yeshua's sake, and also to see Lazarus, who had been raised from the dead. This is why they had come. And wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? If you had heard that, wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want to see that person who was raised from the dead and say, hey, is this real? Did this really happen to you? Wouldn't you want to do that? And then wouldn't you want to see the Messiah that did this? This is amazing. You know, this is amazing. No public relations firm can do this for you. Right? No marketing campaign can do this for you. If you can raise people from the dead after 4 days, others are going to find out about it. It's all for real. And the people wanted to know. And of course, the chief priests, they were all impressed by it too. They conspired to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Judeans went away and believed in Yeshua. We can't have that happening. We can't have multitudes of people believing in Yeshua, so we've got to kill that guy that he raised from the dead. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine this kind of thinking? It's an obsession with their power, isn't it? Multitudes of the Judeans. So this is not the people from Galilee. We saw multitudes down there, right? Or up there in Galilee following Yeshua. Now we're talking about the Judeans in the area around Jerusalem. Now they're believing in Yeshua. These are the people who are supposed to especially be supporting the religious leaders. This has them totally at their wits' end. They're obviously crazy at this point. You know, ready to go on a killing spree. On the next day, a great multitude had come to the feast. When they heard that Yeshua was coming to Jerusalem, they took the branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him and cried out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of Adonai, the King of Israel. Now, we've studied this in the other Gospels, but here it's very plain that this is not just the people who were Yeshua's followers. This is this great multitude of people that had come to the feast. So this now includes those who had put faith in him in Galilee, and now near the center of the nation in Jerusalem, from that whole area, you had a great multitude from there as well. And all of these people wanted Yeshua to be their king. They were recognizing him as the Messiah. And so as he's coming into Jerusalem, they're laying the palm trees in the road ahead of him, meeting him, crying out, blessed is he who comes in the name of Adonai, the King of Israel. Was he the King of Israel? He was the King of Israel. And he is the King of Israel. And the fact that some people have not accepted that, for example, the Pharisees, the fact they didn't accept him as king, did that affect whether he was king? He was king. He was the rightful authority coming into Jerusalem, and the people recognized it, and that's why they were hailing him in this way. And they had lots of reasons. It's not just because he did these great things, but because these are things that were expected of the coming king, of the Messiah. And you know what? Yeshua overperformed. He did all the scripture said and more that they didn't expect. He was so the king. And they were actually quoting from Psalm 118. Now, there's some other things in the chapter too that I think are of interest. Now, a few weeks ago, we read Yeshua was talking about the fact that he is the gate. You might remember that, and we mentioned these verses then. And the psalm says, this is the gate of Yahweh, the righteous will enter into it. And it goes on, I will give thanks to you, for you have answered me and have become my salvation. That is Yeshua. It even names Yeshua. And then it says, the stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. Now, this is all prophetic of what was happening right then. Because the builders of the nation were rejecting Yeshua, who now is coming into the city as the king, as the head of the nation. And then it goes on, save us now, we beg you, Yahweh. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. So this is the direct fulfillment of this psalm. Then it says, Yeshua, having found a young donkey, sat on it, as it is written, don't be afraid, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king comes sitting on a donkey's colt. And of course, this is a prophecy from Zechariah, which we have here. And it's definitely talking about the king coming to Zion. That happened. You know, sometimes people think about the king as coming, future tense. The king came already. He came already. He came on the colt of a donkey, as the scripture prophesied. One custom in ancient times is that when a king would come sitting on a donkey, it means that he was coming in peace, right? A donkey is a lowly animal, so it's a humble entrance. That's how Yeshua came the first time. Revelation 19 tells us how he's coming next time. He's coming prepared for war, which I think is a good idea considering what happened the first time around. He's coming on a white horse with all the armies of heaven. That's what it says in Revelation 19. He's coming prepared for war. He's already done the suffering servant thing. We all should greatly appreciate that, but let me tell you something, that's over now. He's a mighty warrior. And these people today who are standing in the same footsteps as those people who put him to death, they should be really concerned about that. Because he is not in a mood to put up with any more of that kind of nonsense. John says his disciples didn't understand these things at first, but when Yeshua was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him and that they'd done these things to him. You know, prophecy is kind of amazing. A lot of times people don't understand when they're actually seeing prophecy being fulfilled. This is happening right now too, by the way. So often people don't see prophecy being fulfilled, even though it's happening right before their eyes, until they receive revelation. That's what John is talking about. They received the revelation, and then the things they had actually witnessed and been a part of came alive to them from the scriptures. This is happening for the remnant. we're seeing it. How come we see things that other people don't see? It's the will of our Messiah that we see them. It's time for us to see them. That's why we're seeing them. The multitude, therefore, that was with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead was testifying about it. For this cause also the multitude went and met him because they heard that he had done this sign. So here it's explaining for us about the interaction between the multitude that had seen Lazarus and then this larger multitude from among the Judeans. There was a testimony being given by the ones that had seen all this happen. And this is the reason why this larger multitude that heard these things were going out to meet Yeshua. So you see, this was entirely sincere, what was happening with these people. That's all that you can say about this. This was not in any way not authentic. This was authentic. And this is very important for us because it means that that whole story about Israel rejecting the Messiah and then this church organization of the Gentiles being formed, that entire thing is a scam that started with Justin Martyr and then was carried on by the church fathers and bought into by the Gentiles. And now that's all being turned around. That's what we're about to see. Now, in saying this, in no way am I against any of the Christian people. And I'm glad for them that they have put their faith in Yeshua so far as they know him. But the reason I'm pointing this out is not because of any malice towards them, but because we have to know the truth. Here in these last days, we have to understand the truth. And what this really means is that Yahweh is turning his attention back to the remnant, and we're seeing a change. Things are going to go back to the way they were in the first century, and we're seeing Messiah's attention turning back to the remnant, even while the church is suffering major problems, let's face it. Well, getting back to this about the multitude who had just welcomed Yeshua into the city as their king. Multitudes of people. Just imagine the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin watching this, because you're not going to miss this, right? You're not going to miss this. They're up in their high place, up on top of the mountain in Jerusalem. They're able to watch this whole thing, and trust me, they are freaking out. They are totally freaking out. The Pharisees therefore said among themselves, "See how you accomplish nothing. Behold, the world has gone after him." This is such a different picture than how we usually hear about Yeshua. So many times, this is presented as if this was some kind of an event. A few people knew about it, but it was largely ignored. No, that isn't what happened at all. How could the Son of God come into this world and go out like a mouse that nobody ever heard of? He went out like the lion he is. And he left his indelible mark. And the righteous still feel that in the best possible way. And the wicked are going to soon feel it too, but not in a way that they will welcome. That's the plot to kill the king. And it's an amazing story, isn't it?
You have been listening to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. That's the end of today's program. Some of the scripture verses referenced in today's program are John chapter 11, verse 45 through chapter 12, verse 19, John chapter 10, verse 16, Deuteronomy chapter 30, especially verses 1 through 6, Jeremiah chapter 30, verses 3 through verse 11, Ezekiel chapter 37, especially verses 16 through verse 22, Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 8, James chapter 1, verse 1, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1, Psalm 118, especially verses 20 through 26, and Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Further teachings and study materials on the hope of the resurrection, the significance of the death and resurrection of Yeshua Messiah, the restoration of the remnant of Israel to their land in these last days, end times Bible prophecy, Yeshua as the Messiah, Yeshua as the King of faithful Israel, more on the history of the corrupt Judeo-Christian religious leaders before, during, and after Messiah's coming, walking in the Holy Spirit, being a Romans 11 grafted-in Gentile, God's covenant with Israel, and how you can enter into His promises, along with many other teachings and topics, can all be found at our membership site, Zion Tabernacle. Sign up is free. Just go to zion.net. That's TSIYON.net. New programs on the Gospels will be airing every Sabbath right here on Zion Road Radio. Tune in next time for more Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. Shabbat Shalom!
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you'll find rest for your soul. You'll find rest for your souls. Oh, you'll find rest for your souls when you walk in His ways. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. We will return to Yah and sing for joy.
You've heard that the book of Revelation foretells apocalyptic events at the end of the world. You've heard about the Antichrist and the mark of the beast. You may have even heard Eliyahu ben David's programs on Revelation or read his book entitled Announcing Judgment Day. But do you know what the book of Daniel foretells about the last days? Are you aware of the current events that are reshaping the world closer and closer to the one-world government described in biblical prophecy? Eliyahu's Daniel Seminar includes new revelation from Daniel that has been sealed for nearly 2.5 millennia. Join us as a free member on our community site, Zion Tabernacle, for access to our free 8-part video seminar entitled Beasts of Daniel Surfacing. To see what other free resources you'll get as a Zion Tabernacle member, go to zion.org and click Join Us in the menu bar. That's TSIYON.org. Then click Join Us.
Yeshua has come to redeem us. and sing for joy.